The dog was freezing, but he still refused to let go of the box. That was the first thing Captain Ethan Walker noticed when he saw the old German Shepherd standing alone in the Montana snow. The storm had covered the mountain road in white silence, the kind of silence that made every breath feel heavier. Wind moved between the pine trees, carrying the scent of frozen earth and distant with smoke. And there, barely visible through the snowfall, was Ranger, an aging military K-9 with tired eyes, a gray muzzle, and a body that looked like it had carried too many memories. But he was still standing, still pulling. Behind him dragged an old olive-drab ammunition box tied with a worn canvas strap. Ethan had spent years working with military dogs. He knew their loyalty. He knew their training. He knew the difference between a random action and a final mission. And what he saw that morning did not look random. "Ranger," Ethan called softly. The dog stopped. For a moment, the frozen landscape held its breath. Ranger looked toward him, then back at the box. Not afraid, not aggressive, just determined. Ethan slowly approached, his boots sinking into nearly a foot of fresh snow. The temperature was below freezing, and frost covered the edges of Ranger's fur. The old K-9 should have been resting somewhere warm. He should have been enjoying retirement after years of service. Instead, he was here, carrying something through the storm like a promise that could not wait another day. Ethan knelt beside him and reached toward the strap. Ranger gently stepped forward, keeping the box close. That small movement said more than words ever could. The dog was not protecting the metal box. He was protecting what was inside it. Ethan looked at the faded markings on the side. The paint was chipped. The corners were worn. It looked like something forgotten by time. But Ranger remembered. That was what troubled Ethan the most. Because he knew this dog. Years ago, Ranger had served beside him when Ethan was still wearing a Marine uniform. They had shared long days, quiet moments, and missions where trust mattered more than words. But after Ethan left the service, after losing the person who connected them all, he had built walls around the memories he could not carry. He convinced himself that walking away was easier, safer, necessary, until an old K-9 appeared in the snow carrying a piece of the past back to him. Ethan placed a blanket around Ranger's shoulders and carefully helped him toward his truck. The ammo box remained between them. He wanted to open it. Every instinct told him there was an answer waiting inside. But when he looked at Ranger resting beside the box, eyes still fixed on it, Ethan understood something. Some things are not opened because we are curious. Some things are opened because someone waited a very long time for the right person to find them. As the truck disappeared down the snowy road, the old ammunition box sat quietly in the passenger seat. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, an old Marine, a retired K-9, and a forgotten promise were finally traveling in the same direction. The first thing Ethan did after bringing Ranger home was not open the box. He wanted to. The question followed him through every room of the small Montana cabin. What had the old K-9 carried through the snow? Why had Ranger refused to leave it behind? And why had the dog looked at him like he was not finding a stranger, but returning to someone he had known all along? But Ethan had learned something during his years with military working dogs. Trust came before answers. So instead of reaching for the old ammunition box, he built a warm place beside the fireplace and stayed with Ranger through the night. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of burning wood and the steady sound of the dog breathing on the blanket. Outside, the storm continued covering the mountains in white. Inside, an old Marine and an old K-9 sat with memories neither of them had spoken about in years. The next morning, Ethan drove Ranger to a local veterinarian in town. The small clinic smelled like coffee, clean blankets, and winter air brought in from the opening door. The veterinarian checked Ranger carefully and confirmed what Ethan already suspected. The dog was exhausted from the cold and the long journey, but he was stable. He needed rest, food, and time. "He is lucky you found him," the veterinarian said. Ethan looked toward Ranger lying calmly near the window. "I think he found me." The words surprised him because he believed them. After returning home, Ethan finally placed the ammunition box on the wooden table near the fireplace. In the daylight, he noticed details hidden by the storm. The metal was scratched from years of use. A faded label was almost impossible to read. There was no obvious name, no explanation, just a small marking near the corner that made Ethan stop. 3 letters. MC. His hand froze above the surface. Michael Carter. The name belonged to the one person Ethan had spent years trying not to remember. They had served together. They had laughed together. They had trusted each other in ways only people who shared difficult seasons could understand. Michael had been the kind of friend who remembered birthdays, checked on families, and noticed when someone was carrying a burden they refused to talk about. After Michael was gone, Ethan had done what he thought was right. He stepped away. He told himself distance would make things easier for everyone. But now Ranger was lying beside a box connected to Michael, and Ethan felt the weight of a promise he had buried. The dog slowly lifted his head when Ethan touched the old metal surface. Not excited, not impatient, just watching, as if waiting for Ethan to understand why this moment mattered. Ethan sat down beside Ranger. "You carried this all the way here, didn't you?" The dog rested his head back on the blanket. The room became quiet again. Ethan looked at the box, then at the old K-9 who had crossed the snow carrying a piece of someone's past. He knew opening it would change something. Maybe it would bring answers. Maybe it would bring pain. Maybe it would remind him of a promise he had failed to keep. But for the first time in years, Ethan was not thinking about walking away. He reached toward the latch, then stopped. The old Marine looked at Ranger. The dog's eyes remained steady, waiting. And in that quiet cabin surrounded by snow, Ethan realized the hardest missions were never the ones that required strength. They were the ones that required him to finally face what he had left behind. For 3 days, Ethan left the ammunition box exactly where it was. Not because he was afraid of what was inside, but because he understood that some memories needed the right moment before they could be opened. Ranger recovered slowly beside the fireplace, sleeping longer each day and eating small meals with the patience of an old soldier who had learned not to waste energy. The snow outside continued to cover the mountains, but inside the cabin, something from the past was beginning to return. Ethan noticed small things about the old German shepherd that he had forgotten. The way Ranger lifted his ears whenever he heard a familiar sound. The way he looked toward the front door every evening, almost expecting someone who had been gone for years to walk through it. It reminded Ethan of another time, before retirement, before silence became his habit. Back then, Ranger belonged to a different chapter of his life. Ethan still remembered the first day he met the young K-9. Ranger had been full of energy, always watching, always learning. Michael Carter had joked that the dog trusted Ethan more than anyone else. "He knows who stays," Michael had said with a smile. Ethan never forgot those words. Because years later, they felt different. They felt like a question. After dinner on the 4th night, Ethan finally opened an old storage drawer in his cabin. Inside were things he rarely touched. A Marine uniform folded carefully. A photograph from a deployment ceremony. A small collection of memories from a life he thought he had already closed. He placed the photograph beside the ammunition box. Michael stood next to him in the picture, younger, smiling, with one hand resting on Ranger's shoulder. Ethan looked at the image for a long time. The hardest part was not remembering Michael. It was remembering the promise he made after losing him. He had told Michael's family that he would always check in. He had said they would never have to face the future alone. At the time, Ethan believed those words completely. But grief changes the way people see their own decisions. He started with one missed phone call, then another. Then months became years. Eventually, silence became easier than explaining why he had disappeared. The next morning, Ethan contacted the Marine Records office to confirm the markings on the box. The response came several hours later. The ammunition box had been registered as part of Michael Carter's personal effects. But there was something unusual. It had never been delivered to the final recipient listed in the records. Ethan read the message twice. Final recipient. Those words stayed with him. Someone had been waiting for this box. Someone Michael had chosen before he was gone. Ranger stood beside the table and looked at the unopened container. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. "You were taking this somewhere, weren't you?" The old K-9 looked up at him. For a moment, Ethan felt something he had not felt in years. Not certainty, not an answer, just a quiet understanding that this journey was not about discovering what was hidden inside a metal box. It was about discovering who had been waiting on the other side of it. Ethan finally reached for the latch again. This time, he did not stop. But before opening it, he looked at Ranger. The dog rested his head against Ethan's hand. And in that small cabin surrounded by snow, an old Marine understood something he had spent years avoiding. Some promises do not disappear when we walk away from them. They simply wait for us to find the courage to come back. The latch finally opened just after sunrise. For a moment, Ethan did nothing. He simply looked at the old ammunition box sitting on the wooden table, its metal surface covered with years of scratches and memories. Ranger stood beside him, quiet and steady, as if he already knew that this moment was not about curiosity. It was about respect. Ethan slowly lifted the lid. Inside was not a secret military document, not a valuable object, not something that could be measured in money. Instead, there were pieces of a life that had been waiting patiently for the right person to find them. The first thing Ethan saw was a small envelope with his name written across the front. His hand paused. The handwriting was familiar. Michael's handwriting. He had seen it countless times on reports, notes, and quick messages during their years together. But seeing his own name written there after all these years felt different. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter dated only weeks before Michael's final deployment. Ethan read the first line and immediately had to stop. "I know you, brother. You will blame yourself for things that were never yours to carry." The cabin became completely silent. Even Ranger seemed to understand that the words mattered. Ethan continued reading. Michael wrote about ordinary things. About his family. About his daughter, Lily. About how much she loved baseball and how she always asked questions about the world around her. He wrote that children did not remember expensive gifts or perfect moments. They remembered who sat beside them, who showed up, who stayed. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. His eyes moved toward the photograph inside the box. It showed a little girl standing beside Michael at a baseball field. She was younger then, wearing an oversized glove and smiling with the kind of happiness only children have before they understand loss. Behind them, Ranger sat proudly, and Ethan recognized the field immediately. It was the same place where he and Michael had spent countless afternoons talking about life beyond the uniform. Beneath the photograph was another item. A small child's drawing folded carefully into a square. Ethan opened it and saw a simple picture made with crayons. A dog. A baseball field. 3 people standing together. At the bottom were words written in uneven handwriting. "For Uncle Ethan, when he comes back." Those words stayed in the room longer than any sound. Ethan looked away. He had prepared himself for sadness. He had prepared himself for memories of Michael. But he had not prepared himself for the idea that someone had been waiting for him all this time. Ranger moved closer and placed his head against Ethan's leg. The old Marine rested a hand on the dog's fur. "She waited for me," he whispered. The answer was not spoken. It was hidden inside every letter, every photograph, every carefully saved piece of a childhood that continued without him. Ethan reached deeper into the box and found an old baseball glove wrapped in a soft cloth. The glove was small, worn, and repaired several times. On the inside was a handwritten note from Michael. "She outgrew this one. She kept it because she said you helped her learn to throw." Ethan closed his eyes. A memory returned. A summer afternoon. A little girl laughing as Ranger chased a baseball across the grass. Michael standing nearby, smiling. A promise made without realizing how heavy it would become. The box was no longer just something Ranger carried through the snow. It was a message from someone who knew Ethan better than he knew himself. And now Ethan understood the truth. The hardest part of coming home was not finding the place. It was facing the people who had been waiting there. For the rest of the morning, Ethan did not leave the cabin. The ammunition box remained open on the table, surrounded by pieces of a story that had been waiting years to be completed. The old Marine sat quietly, reading every letter Michael had left behind. Each page revealed something Ethan had forgotten. Not about missions, not about duty, about the simple moments that mattered when nobody was watching. Michael wrote about Lily's first baseball practice. How she held the glove backward and laughed when the ball rolled past her. How she kept asking when Uncle Ethan would come back to teach her another throw. Ethan stopped reading for a moment after that sentence. He remembered. He remembered the little girl running across the field with Ranger beside her. He remembered Michael standing near the fence, smiling because his daughter had found another person she trusted. Then life changed. The uniform was folded away. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits became promises for another time. And eventually, another time never came. Ethan always told himself there had been reasons. He was grieving. He was trying to give Michael's family space. He thought his absence protected them from more pain. But the letters told a different story. Michael never wanted Ethan to disappear. He wanted him to stay connected. Near the bottom of the box, Ethan found a small digital recorder wrapped carefully in cloth. The battery was old, but when he pressed the button, a familiar voice filled the cabin. Michael's voice. Older recordings were mixed with moments from everyday life. A laugh, a conversation, a quiet afternoon at a baseball field. Then the final message began. Ethan, if you are hearing this, then Ranger found you. Ethan looked at the old German shepherd lying near the fireplace. The dog opened his eyes, but did not move. I know you. You will think you failed me. You will think there was something you should have done differently. But listen carefully. My family does not need a hero. Lily does not need someone to replace me. She needs someone who remembers her. Ethan lowered his head. The room felt smaller. Every word reached a place he had kept closed for years. Michael continued. You were always good at protecting people when there was a problem to solve. But life is not always a mission. Sometimes people just need someone to sit beside them. The recording ended with a quiet sound of laughter in the background. Probably Lily. Probably a memory from a better day. Ethan remained still after the message finished. Ranger slowly walked over and rested his head against Ethan's knee. The old Marine placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. You knew, didn't you? He whispered. Ranger simply stayed there. Outside, the snow began melting from the roof, sending small drops of water onto the frozen ground below. Winter was beginning to release its grip. Ethan looked back at the photograph of Lily. She was not the little girl from the picture anymore. Somewhere out there, she had grown up while he was busy convincing himself that leaving was the right choice. He looked at the letters again. There was one more envelope at the bottom of the box. This one was addressed differently. Not to him. To Lily. Ethan held it carefully. He knew the next step was not about finding answers for himself. It was about returning something that never belonged to him. The old K-9 had carried the box through the snow because a promise was still waiting to be delivered. And now Ethan finally understood. Ranger's last mission was never about the box. It was about bringing a forgotten promise back home. The letter addressed to Lily stayed on Ethan's table for the entire night. He did not open it. Not because he was afraid of what it contained, but because he knew some words were not meant to be read by the person who found them first. They belonged to the person who had been waiting. The next morning, the Montana sky finally cleared. The storm clouds moved away from the mountains, leaving behind bright sunlight that reflected across the fields of snow. Ranger stood near the cabin door, watching Ethan carefully. The old German shepherd looked different now. Still tired. Still carrying the weight of his years. But there was a quiet peace in his eyes. Like a mission that had been unfinished for too long was finally moving forward. Ethan prepared his truck and placed the ammunition box safely inside. He packed the letters, the photograph, the recorder, and the small baseball glove. Every item had a story. Every item carried a piece of someone who was no longer there to tell it. Before leaving, Ethan looked around the cabin. For years, this place had been his hiding place. A place where he could avoid memories, avoid questions, and avoid the people connected to the past. But now it felt different. It no longer felt like home. It felt like the place where he had been waiting for courage to arrive. The drive toward town took nearly 2 hours. Snow-covered mountains slowly gave way to quiet roads, small neighborhoods, and familiar signs of everyday life. Ethan had searched the records and found Lily's current information through the proper channels. He did not want to appear suddenly. He did not want to interrupt her life. He only wanted to return what belonged to her. When he arrived at the community center where Lily spent her afternoons, Ethan stayed in the truck for several minutes. The old Marine who had once walked confidently into uncertain situations now sat quietly, unsure of the right words. Ranger rested in the back seat. Ethan looked at him through the mirror. You made this look easier. The dog lifted his head slightly. Ethan smiled for the first time that morning. Then he stepped out. Inside the community center, children were finishing activities, families were talking, and the sound of normal life filled the hallway. Ethan saw her before she saw him. Lily was older than the photograph. The little girl with the oversized baseball glove had become a thoughtful young girl with calm eyes and a quiet confidence. She carried a backpack over one shoulder and held a worn baseball glove in her hand. The same kind of glove Michael had written about. Ethan stopped. For a moment, he was no longer a retired Marine, no longer a wealthy businessman. He was simply the person who had arrived years later than he promised. Lily noticed him. Her expression changed slightly. Not fear, not anger, just surprise. Ethan held the small envelope carefully. Lily Carter? He asked softly. She nodded. My name is Ethan Walker. The room seemed quieter for a moment. Her eyes moved toward Ranger standing beside him. The old K-9 recognized her before words were needed. His tail moved gently. Lily's face changed as memories returned. She stepped closer, slowly placing a hand on Ranger's head. He remembers me, she whispered. Ethan looked down. He never forgot. And in that moment, Ethan understood why Ranger had crossed the snow. Not to deliver a box. Not to reveal a secret. The old K-9 had carried a bridge between two people who thought they had lost each other forever. For several minutes, nobody moved. Lily's hand remained on Ranger's head while the old German shepherd stood quietly beside her. The noise of the community center continued around them, but Ethan felt like the world had slowed down. He watched the dog he once trained recognize someone he thought he had lost forever. It was not a dramatic moment. No perfect words appeared. Just a young girl reconnecting with a piece of her childhood that had survived when so many other things had changed. Lily looked up at Ethan. He really remembers me? Ethan nodded. Ranger remembers everything that matters. She looked back at the dog, gently running her hand along his gray fur. My dad said he was the smartest dog he ever knew. Ethan smiled faintly. Your dad was usually right about things like that. The mention of Michael changed the air between them. Lily looked down at the envelope in Ethan's hand. She knew exactly what it was before he said anything. Is that from him? Ethan held it carefully. Yes. Her fingers moved toward the envelope, but stopped halfway. For a moment, Ethan saw the little girl from the photograph again. The child who had written letters to someone she believed would return. The child who had waited beside a promise she did not understand. I do not know if I am ready, Lily said quietly. Ethan nodded. That is okay. He did not tell her she needed to be brave. He did not tell her everything would be fine. Some moments did not need fixing. They only needed someone willing to stay. They sat together at a small table near the window. Ranger rested beneath it, close enough that Lily could reach down whenever she wanted. Ethan placed the envelope between them. Lily opened it slowly. Inside was a letter from her father written before his final deployment. She read silently at first. Ethan looked away, giving her the privacy he wished someone had given him years earlier. Outside, clouds moved across the sky, and the late afternoon light stretched across the parking lot. After several minutes, Lily folded the letter carefully. Her eyes were full, but she was not crying. She looked like someone who had found a missing piece of a story she had carried for a long time. He knew you would come back, she said. Ethan looked at her. I do not think I knew how to come back. Lily studied him for a moment. But Ranger did. Ethan looked down at the old K-9. The dog was asleep now, completely relaxed. After everything he had carried through the snow, after years of waiting, Ranger had finally reached the place he was meant to find. Your dad was a good man, Ethan said. Lily nodded. He talked about you a lot. The words were simple, but they carried years of distance. Ethan felt the weight of every missed birthday, every unanswered message, every moment he convinced himself that leaving was easier. But Lily did not look at him with anger. She looked at him with the same question hidden inside Michael's letter. Would he stay this time? Ethan understood that trust was not rebuilt through one conversation. It was built through ordinary moments repeated again and again. He did not promise things he could not guarantee. He only said the one thing he knew he could do. I would like to hear about your baseball season. Lily looked surprised. Then she smiled slightly. It starts next month. Ethan nodded. Then maybe I can come watch. Ranger opened one eye as if he approved. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt that returning home was not about going back to where he had been. It was about finally being present where he was needed now. The weeks that followed were not filled with grand promises. Ethan learned quickly that rebuilding trust was not about saying the perfect thing at the perfect moment. It was about showing up when nobody was watching. Every Saturday morning, he drove from his cabin in Montana to the small community baseball field where Lily practiced. The drive was nearly 2 hours, but he never saw the distance as a burden. For years, he had used distance as an excuse. Now, every mile felt like a reminder of the promise he was finally keeping. Ranger came with him whenever the veterinarian said the old K-9 was strong enough. The German shepherd moved slower than he once did, but everyone noticed the change in his spirit. He was no longer searching through snow. He was no longer carrying a mission that belonged to the past. He simply walked beside Ethan, enjoying the quiet moments he had earned. At the baseball field, Lily never rushed toward him. Ethan appreciated that. Their relationship grew through small conversations. She told him about school, her favorite players, and how she wanted to improve her pitching. Ethan listened more than he spoke. That was something Michael had understood about him long ago. Ethan knew how to protect people, but he was still learning how to simply be present. One afternoon after practice, Lily sat beside him on the aluminum bleachers. The field was almost empty, and the evening sun painted the grass with a warm golden color. Ranger rested underneath the bench, his eyes half closed. Lily held her old glove in her hands. "My dad used to say you were the most serious person he knew," she said. Ethan smiled. He was probably right. He said you always acted like everything was a mission. Ethan looked across the field. "I think I forgot that people are not missions." Lily looked at him, waiting. Ethan continued quietly. "Sometimes people do not need someone to solve everything. Sometimes they just need someone who stays." The words felt familiar, like an echo from Michael's recording. Lily looked down at the glove. "I used to think you left because you forgot us." Ethan took a breath. There were many explanations he could have offered, many reasons, but he knew the truth was simpler. "I did not forget you." He paused. "I just did not know how to come back." Lily nodded slowly. It was not a complete answer to every hurt. It was not a magical moment where everything disappeared, but it was honest. And honesty was where trust began. A few weeks later, the community held a small appreciation event for local veterans. Ethan almost skipped it. Old habits returned sometimes. The instinct to stay away. The fear that people would ask questions he was not ready to answer. But Lily asked if he would come. So he did. Ranger attended too, wearing his old service patch on a small band around his collar. People who knew his story gathered around him. They did not see an old dog who had become tired. They saw a loyal companion who had carried something important farther than anyone expected. Ethan watched Lily talking with neighbors, laughing with friends, and holding Ranger's leash. He realized something that surprised him. He had spent years believing he needed to honor Michael by protecting his memory. But Michael never asked for a monument. He asked for presence. He asked for someone to be there for Lily. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Ethan sat beside Ranger and watched Lily practice throwing a baseball across the field. The dog rested his head against Ethan's leg. The same dog who had crossed the snow with a heavy box now carried nothing at all. And somehow, that felt like the greatest sign that the mission was finally complete. By the end of summer, Ethan stopped measuring time by the years he had lost and started noticing the moments he was finally present for. The small baseball field in Montana became a place where new memories quietly replaced old regrets. Every Saturday, the same routine returned. Lily arrived with her glove. Ethan sat on the aluminum bleachers. Ranger rested nearby, watching everything with the calm patience of a dog who had already completed the most important mission of his life. The old German shepherd was slower now. His steps were shorter. His gray muzzle showed every year he had carried. But his eyes remained the same. Loyal, focused, peaceful. One evening after practice, Ethan brought the ammunition box to the field. It was no longer a mystery. It was no longer a weight from the past. It sat beside him on the bench, not as a reminder of what had been lost, but as proof of what had been returned. Lily noticed it immediately. "You brought it here." Ethan nodded. "I thought it belonged here for a while." She sat beside him and looked at the old metal container. "I used to think my dad left it because he knew something bad would happen." Ethan looked at her gently. "Your dad did not leave because he wanted to leave." Lily was quiet. She already knew that. But sometimes knowing something and feeling it were two different things. Ethan opened the box one final time. Inside were the same objects that had changed everything. The letters, the photograph, the glove, the recorder. But now they did not feel painful. They felt like pieces of a family story that had finally found its missing page. Lily picked up the old glove and smiled. "I remember this." Ethan smiled too. "Your dad told me you would not let anyone replace it." She laughed softly. "I thought it made me throw better." "Did it?" Ethan asked. Lily looked at the glove seriously for a moment. "Maybe not." The simple answer made them both laugh. Ranger lifted his head at the sound. For years, Ethan believed healing would arrive as some dramatic moment. A perfect apology. A perfect explanation. A single day where everything felt normal again. But that was not how life worked. Healing came quietly. It came through Saturday mornings. Through conversations on empty bleachers. Through showing up when nobody was keeping score. As autumn approached, Ranger's walks became shorter. Ethan built a comfortable resting place near the cabin window where the old K-9 could watch the mountains. Lily visited often. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not. Sometimes they simply sat beside Ranger and listened to the wind outside. One evening, Ethan found Lily looking at the old service patch attached to Ranger's collar. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. Ethan looked at the dog resting peacefully nearby. "Knows what?" "That he brought us back together." Ethan smiled softly. "I think he knew before we did." The next morning, Ranger walked outside one last time to feel the cool mountain air. Ethan and Lily sat beside him as the sun rose over the snow-covered peaks. No ceremony, no crowd, no final speech. Just three souls sharing a quiet morning. Ethan placed a hand on Ranger's fur and whispered, "You can rest now." The old K-9 closed his eyes peacefully. The dog who once carried a heavy box through the snow had finally set down every burden he carried. Years later, Lily would still tell people about Ranger. Not as a military dog who completed a mission, but as a loyal friend who reminded everyone that some promises survive distance, time, and even loss. Ethan never forgot the lesson either. The hardest journeys are not always about finding the way home. Sometimes they are about realizing who was waiting there all along.